I just flew in from Detroit this afternoon, and I'm kind of upset I only have a day here in the city. And there's one thing that I need to do when I'm here besides this conference, and that is I need to get my picture taken with the Rocky statue. I don't know, has anybody here heard about this Detroit RoboCop statue? Is that a couple people? Some clappers. My friends and I do a lot of crowdfunding projects in Detroit, and one of the adventures we got ourselves into earlier this year is that we ended up raising like $60,000 online to build a statue of RoboCop in Detroit. And it all kind of started from somebody tweeting at the mayor of Detroit that Detroit should have a statue of RoboCop because Philadelphia has a statue of Rocky and RoboCop could beat up Rocky. And we kind of picked up the mantle. The story I'm going to tell you right now is kind of, it's a creative internet startup adventure set in Detroit, Michigan. And it kind of progresses from being interesting to important, I think, in the work that we've been doing there. And as a brief preface, I grew up in New Jersey, but I'm kind of an American mutt. I lived in like 6 different cities around the country. I like all my American cities and my American network. And I've been in Detroit for about 3 years now. I kind of took the red pill and fell in love with it. I wanted to be somewhere where I could be influenced by a place that's traditionally offline in many ways, manufacturing heavy, and then see what we could do by getting creative with online and network thinking there. So the name of our startup is Loveland Technologies. Kind of our initial mantra or challenge is this idea of how big can you make an inch. So when we started, we literally, our first offering, product, whatever you want to call it, was we were inviting people to buy square inches of land in the city. So we called this becoming an inch-vestor, and you'd buy land in a micro-hood. And this was kind of virtual land you could log into online, but it corresponded to actual vacant lots that we were buying in the city. And is Rita King here in the front row? Rita, who's also going to speak here, is a funny coincidence, was our first inch-vestor. And I was telling her about this idea, and she purchased 1,000 square inches. So just so you know, that's about 3 by 3 feet. It represents about $1,000, which is pretty cool. That was our first hit. So when you go to it's at intranet.com, this project. When you go there, you see these micro-hood maps. And as you kind of explore them and mouse around them, you see the names of all the inch-vestors that have purchased these different blocks. And when you drill through, you see more about that person. There's like a space where you can tell a story about what you want to do with your property. And that story can be anything. It doesn't need to be something that's actually achievable. You could say, I want to build my robot factory here, et cetera. So it's kind of an interesting mix of like Farmville mixed with like Dungeons and Dragons, like set in Detroit, I guess is a decent way of thinking about it. And when people inch-vest at a certain level, we send them square-inch golden deeds and magnifying glasses and a postcard from their property in Detroit. And we've made some land dispensers. These are like repurposed vending machines that we have in stores in Detroit, so you can like physically go in and buy a little tiny piece of property. And corresponding to the virtual map on the properties, we kind of build out these forms so that if you visit them, you know exactly where your inches are, and you're allowed to physically engage with them if you want to. We've had some misadventures. We initially tried to build a solar-powered video camera so that inch-vestors could tune into what was happening on their property. And like the day that we put it up, somebody chopped down the pole and took it. And we got a lesson that you can't leave valuable electronics on vacant lots in Detroit, if anybody was wondering about that. And I should probably say right now that the original thinking, I mentioned, being inspired to try and explore a traditionally offline city that was changing, and see what the internet could do if we could work it into the fabric of what was happening in the city. And in Detroit, I guess the 3 big stats that I like to share about the city so you get a sense of it is that in 1950, Detroit had 2 million people, and today it has 700,000, so it has about a third of its peak population is there. So there's tons and tons of empty space. There's about a third of the city is not owned by businesses or individuals, so the city doesn't generate tax revenue, and it's basically very hard for the city to maintain. And there are 70,000 empty structures in the city. And so land use is a huge issue that people have, trying to maintain it, trying to figure out what everyone's going to collectively do with it. So this project was kind of a gateway in thinking about that. If you hear about cheap land in Detroit, well, here's some really cheap land in Detroit, but set up in a positive spirit, kind of building community out of it. Once we filled up our first micro-hood, we started to try and get more and more connected to real life and story. as I say, getting connected to real life. One of the things we did is we started creating this storyverse of like characters. So like Inchy is like kind of like our Mario, if this was Mario Brothers. And then we kind of riffed on things in the city. We had like famous mayors come back from the dead as like cyborg butt kickers, kind of fighting like decay and rot and evil monsters in Detroit. But more importantly, for getting real, we started a program where half of your investment money would go towards other projects in the city. So we tried to have a full range of things from like building rehabs and building community gardens and urban farms to just really cool public artworks. And over the last 2 years, we've helped raise, I think it's $180,000 through this project. So that's pretty cool. We also started, there was this huge pressure, I guess you'd imagine too, as you do this, and like being new to the city as well. I didn't know exactly what it would be like when we started. Like, I had moved to Detroit from San Francisco, where there's like tons and tons of just, you know, wild creative projects and technology projects happening. And it was kind of funny because when we got to the city and started doing this, it was very loud, I guess you would say. Like, who are these crazy people like running around the city, like selling inches of land? Like, we very quickly became like the crazy inch people, but in a good way, because people would kind of like be like, what the heck are you doing? And it would start all these fantastic conversations. And we always got this pressure from people to kind of use our skills and our creativity for more and more good. So we started working on new kinds of like creative fundraising projects for people. This is somebody who's making a documentary about positive stories in Detroit, that we built this system where instead of buying inches, you'd buy frames in his film. And they've raised about $80,000 through the system for that. We got invited to become part of renovating 2 blighted houses that have been empty for at least a couple of decades, right across from this crazy structure right here. This is called Michigan Central Station. This is like probably one of the most interesting pieces of architecture in America. Not a lot of people outside of Michigan know about it, I think, but it's the world's tallest train station. It's was built by the same team that built Grand Central Station in New York. And we basically got invited to purchase these 2 $500 houses that were totally messed up and arsoned and everything else, and begin rehabbing those. And in the process of that, we brought in a lot of creativity and events and things that make it really inviting for people to come to a space that they normally wouldn't be able to visit. And unfortunately, I can't talk about it yet. We also recently got invited to help with a project to actually begin renovating this giant building over here too, which is pretty rad. What we're doing now and how we've kind of made this, I mentioned going from interesting to important and kind of challenging ourselves to think, how big can you make an inch? As we were working on these interactive microhood maps and stuff, we realized that we had a really cool kind of social mapping system that worked really well. It was really fast. We got really good at making different features for it. You know, a map where you can put money into it, where you can comment, where you can see who owns everything. And we realized there's really no difference between an inch and a house or a city block except for scale. It's all just scale. You know, it's like Google Maps, like zooming in or zooming out. So we're like, wow, you know, we could really make some incredible like SimCity Detroit style maps if we could get the real life data for the city, if we could get parcel maps for neighborhoods and whatnot. And so we've started working on really like trying to make the city of Detroit interactive in some pretty incredible new ways that we haven't seen other cities kind of do yet. So starting from buying these microhood properties at foreclosure auctions, we decided to take on visualizing and making the foreclosure auctions more accessible and user-friendly and conversational than they ever had been. So our current project, you can click on a neighborhood in Detroit, and you can see all of the properties that are currently being auctioned. It's kind of incredible. Every year, the Wayne County, the county that Detroit's in, has an auction where they sell tens of thousands of properties for $500 a piece. This is like the opening bid on them. And the vast majority don't receive any bids at all. And part of it is because the properties are oftentimes in rough condition, but also a lot of it is that there's really no good way for people to gather together and kind of take on something as a group or plan. Usually they just come out as this kind of like mysterious text-based list. So now people in Detroit can click on their neighborhoods. They can see exactly what's going on around them with the auction. You can drop down to these parcel-based maps, which are just like inches again, except now it's the city, instead of inches. And people can have conversations about stories they know about the properties, ideas they have for them, et cetera. And we've also begun keeping a tab of who it is who's purchasing these properties, because a lot of times it'll be a speculator. It'll be somebody who doesn't really have any invested interest in rehabbing the property. So we're trying to make that whole process a lot more transparent for people to get involved in. The kinds of conversations that come out of this are really great. We've had people that kind of explore what's up for auction, and they'll actually go and they'll knock on people's doors, and in many cases people won't know that they're being foreclosed on. So they'll help them through that process and try to figure out how to keep their house or their building if they want to do that. Or they'll reveal conditions of a building or form plans through the site to actually collaborate with other people to take something on and fix something up. As an extension of this auction map, and this is kind of a fun idea because this is new, and we don't really know how to manage it yet. But at this upcoming auction, we've started this thing called the land blank, which is kind of like a land bank, but a little bit reimagined. Essentially what we're doing is that we're both making it easier for people to bid on properties because they can just call us, and if they have the money, we'll do it for them. But then we're also inviting people to crowdfund life-sized properties in Detroit, so not just inches. So every $500 we raise through Land Blank is a house or a factory or a vacant lot that actually gets purchased. And then what we're doing is we're advertising those, showing everybody exactly what we have and making that very clear and transparent. And then we're going to try and marry those properties to their best local use. So that might mean giving it to a neighbor, it might mean deeding it over to a community group, or it might mean giving it to somebody who really wants to live there, or a team that has an idea for what to do with the space. So in the very near future, I think we already have money for like 10 properties, and we're going to be this kind of accidental, very weird and interesting group that's going to have to make some choices about things. We always get into crowdfunding adventures with our friends. This is kind of interesting. This is one we're currently working on. This is an artist that we know wanted to get this image of the big three all in one frame, kind of collaborating with each other, which kind of amazingly, never happens in Detroit. But crowdfund this artwork and this message up on this billboard. So we've been using this new site, Loud Sauce, where people can group purchase advertising messages, but they don't have to be advertising messages, just making it easy to get on TV or the radio or billboards. So that's something to check out. And then checking back in on the RoboCop statue stuff, I just have to. It's kind of amazing. This is actually the model that we'll be casting it from. It's kind of incredible what happens sometimes when you get projects out into the world who will step up to work with you and support you. And we put this crazy thing online and it worked to raise funds, and all of a sudden the MGM film studio is behind us, and the world's best craftsperson at rebuilding robot stuff is making this form. And so that should be physically installed as a 10-foot tall bronze statue in Detroit at some point next year. So I hope any Rocky fans come and visit that too. I think that the message that I kind of want to wrap it up with, and hopefully that was succinct. We're just crazy and motivated, so we work on all sorts of different stuff. I mean, we're focused, but we just my friends and I just compulsively create these things. So there's lots of little nooks and crannies, that could be talked about. But it's really a process of starting with a kind of motivation and not being afraid to be a little bit different in public as you evolve your idea. I mean, when we started this project, I didn't know Detroit at all. This was the inches were my way of learning the city. Seeing how people responded to it, using that as a gateway to learn more about land use issues, learning who everyone is, learning how city government works. And it was incredible because it was kind of this Trojan horse idea. It was so ridiculous, but touching on something that was so present that we got invited into some pretty interesting quarters to brainstorm how a city like Detroit could be put online to make more intelligent decisions. And I hope that act of thinking that it's okay, you're allowed to start very small and very hazy, and if you stay dedicated to it over time, you'll get really good. And I think people will also appreciate you and your personality more for doing that. So don't be afraid, and don't be afraid to visit Detroit. And hope to see some of you guys there next year, maybe hanging out with RoboCop. We can meet at Rocky. We can go to RoboCop. It'll be a good time. And that's it, except for questions. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I could ask myself some questions. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the Lions' secret to becoming so good so fast? Is it the lack of Andy Reid?
You're right, because the Lions, it was 2 years ago. It was the year I moved to Detroit. They had 0 wins, right? They were the only team in the NFL history to get 0 wins. I don't know. Something's happened in Detroit generally that's pretty good. You know, Lions are probably a good metaphor, but. You know, I don't want to entirely take credit for the success of the Detroit Lions. It wasn't just me. There's a lot of people that worked really hard, but yeah. Anybody else? Thank you very much. So. That's a good question, because also part of the story, I think, is the amazing work you can do these days with technology with small, dedicated teams. There's really only 3 of us that work full-time. And then and that's one really badass programmer. And then it's me kind of playing the Steve Jobs to his Wozniak, if you will, like being like a creative director on it. And then our partner, Mary, is like a everything else communicator manager. And then we also we just brought on another programmer and a web designer. But it's incredible if you learn your stuff, you know, you can do an awful lot with the internet with a small team right now. And we've kind of intentionally tried to stay lean so we can stay flexible. But yeah. Cool. Thank you, everybody.